You'll need 1 persimmon, which is very similar to a tomato, but the skin is a bit tougher. They're also very sweet to the point that they remind me of a kiwi without the seeds, but again, the texture is closer to maybe even a green tomato or a melon than anything I've ever eaten. You'll need 1 small red onion, which you'll probably use only half of. Some sort of crumbly cheese that can be either Gorgonzola or even a goat cheese, but I'm simply using a white cheese very similar to Feta. You also need some sort of lean smoked ham of your choosing. I've actually made this with smoked duck breast as well, which works really nicely. Some fresh cracked black pepper. My grinder was actually out of commission, so I had to grind it by hand. And lastly, some fresh or frozen puff pastry. I know it's an arm and a leg in the States, but I promise you won't be sorry if you're making this for a special occasion. Have your oven set to 350 degrees while you prep the persimmon. Start out by kind of scooping out the very top core of the persimmon, then slicing it pretty much as thin as you can get it. Like I said, the skin can be pretty tough, but it tends not to be much of an issue once it's cooked, similar to the skin of an eggplant. Next, move on to the onion, which you also want to slice into relatively thin rings. If the puff pastry you're using was initially frozen, make sure it's completely thawed before you attempt to unroll it, and do so onto a non-stick cookie sheet. If you don't have a non-stick surface, believe it or not, you're going to need to add a thin layer of oil on your pan before you lay the puff pastry out, because it will stick and it will make you want to cry if it does. As you're laying out the ham, try to stagger it pretty evenly, even about a ½ inch around the edge. Truth be told, I could have used 1 extra slice, but I couldn't really unring that biscuit sandwich bell from the morning before, so I had to deal with that. Next, lay down the slices of persimmon. And again, make sure you leave about a ½ inch for the border. I use pretty much the entire persimmon less the 2 ends. Then, for the lack of a better term, sprinkle over the onions. And I say sprinkle because, well, you don't have to be very meticulous about it. Followed by the cheese. Crumble a bit if you need to, so you don't end up with huge chunks in one spot. Then sprinkle or grind over the cracked pepper. Lastly, score the edges of the puff pastry with the blunt side of a butter knife. A fork would also work, but I don't personally care much for the fork look. Place this in the oven for about 20 minutes or just until the edges begin to puff and become golden brown. The saltiness of the smoked ham with the delicate sharpness of the cheese next to the sweet persimmon has such a huge contrast of textures and flavors that it somehow just works. It's a very rich dish, and I tend to serve it next to some leafy greens or pretty much anything with milder flavors to follow. Let me know if you give it a try.